Marcus Chen was not supposed to be at the Atom or Radio Observatory that night, and he would think about this fact for the rest of his life, turning it over in his mind like a stone worn smooth by water. He was a maintenance technician, nothing more and nothing less. A man who fixed broken cables and replaced failing hard drives and made sure the coffee machine in the break room worked properly, because the astronomers became very unpleasant when their coffee machine failed. His colleague David had called in sick that evening with a stomach bug, and Marcus had agreed to cover the night shift because he needed the extra money and because his apartment felt too empty and quiet since his wife had left him 3 months ago. The Atacama Desert stretched out around the observatory like a sea of darkness, and above it the stars burned with a brightness that city people never got to see. Thousands upon thousands of points of light scattered across the black canvas of the sky. Marcus sat in the control room with his feet up on the desk and a paperback novel in his hands. Some old science fiction story about aliens and space travel that he had found in the break room. And he was not paying attention to the monitors because nothing ever happened during the night shift. The dishes outside moved slowly through their automated patterns, listening to the whispers of the universe, recording data that scientists would analyze months or years later, searching for something that most people believed they would never find. At exactly 3:47 in the morning, a sound made Marcus look up from his book. One of the monitors was flashing red, and a pattern was scrolling across the screen. A pattern that looked nothing like the usual noise and static that the dishes picked up from the cosmos. Marcus put down his book and leaned forward in his chair, and his heart began to beat faster as he stared at the screen. The pattern was regular and structured, repeating itself over and over again, a sequence of pulses that could not have come from any natural source, not from a pulsar or a quasar or any of the other cosmic objects that the astronomers studied. Marcus had worked at the observatory for 7 years, and he had sat through dozens of training sessions about what to do if they ever detected something unusual. But now that it was actually happening, his mind went blank and his hands began to shake. He picked up the phone to call Dr. Reyes, the lead astronomer who lived in a small house just a few kilometers from the observatory. But then he stopped and put the phone down again on the screen. A trajectory analysis program was running automatically, and it was showing him something strange. The signal was not aimed at Earth. The beam was pointed at a location somewhere in the outer reaches of the solar system, at a spot in the Kuiper Belt where there was nothing but ice and rock and darkness. And Earth had simply drifted into the path of the beam by accident. Marcus understood what this meant, and the understanding made him feel very small and very alone, somewhere out there in the vast emptiness of space. Someone was talking to someone else, and humanity was not part of the conversation, had never been invited to join, was simply eavesdropping on a discussion between strangers. He looked at the clock on the wall and did some quick calculations in his head. In 40 minutes, the Earth would rotate out of alignment with the signal, and the beam would pass over them and continue on its way to wherever it was going. And this moment would be over forever. He thought about Dr. Reyes, and the protocols and the committees and the years of careful analysis that would follow if he reported this through proper channels. He thought about all the times humanity had listened to the sky and heard nothing. All the decades of silence that had made people wonder if they were alone in the universe. He thought about his empty apartment and his failed marriage, and his small life that had never seemed to matter very much to anyone. And then Marcus Chen did something that he could not explain. Not then, and not later when people asked him why. Something that came from a place deep inside him that he had not known existed. He sat down at the transmission console and typed in a simple message. The first 100 prime numbers followed by a basic binary greeting. The same message that scientists had always said humanity should send if it ever wanted to announce itself to the cosmos. His finger hovered over the transmission key, And in that moment, he understood that he was about to change everything. That nothing would ever be the same after this. That he was making a choice that he had no right to make on behalf of everyone on Earth. He pressed the key. The dish outside shifted and hummed, and a beam of radio waves shot out into the darkness, carrying the first message that humanity had ever sent in reply to an alien signal. Marcus sat back in his chair and let out a long breath. And his hands were still shaking, but now there was something else mixed in with the fear. Something that felt almost like hope. Then he picked up the phone and called Dr. Reyes. The astronomer answered on the fifth ring, his voice thick with sleep and irritation. And Marcus told him what had happened, all of it. The signal and the trajectory, and the message he had sent. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Dr. Reyes said a word that Marcus had never heard him use before. A word that expressed shock and anger and disbelief all at once. And he said he would be there in 10 minutes. Marcus hung up the phone and looked at the monitor, where the alien signal was still scrolling across the screen, still repeating its mysterious pattern, still calling out to whoever was listening in the cold darkness beyond the planets. He did not know if he had done the right thing. And he knew that many people would say he had done something terrible, something unforgivable, something that could have consequences beyond anything he could imagine. But as he sat there in the quiet control room with the stars burning overhead and the dishes turning slowly in the desert night, Marcus Chen felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Felt like his life finally meant something. He felt like he had answered a question that humanity had been asking since the first person looked up at the sky and wondered if anyone else was out there. He had said hello, and now, for better or worse, the universe knew that humanity existed. The signal from the stars continued for another 37 minutes. And then it stopped, and the screens went dark. And the dishes picked up nothing but the usual whispers and static of the cosmos. By the time Dr. Reyes arrived at the observatory with 3 other scientists and a government official who had been woken from his bed by an urgent phone call, the moment had passed and the stars were silent again. But the message Marcus had sent was already racing outward through the darkness, traveling at the speed of light toward a destination he would never see, carrying a greeting that could not be taken back. He had answered the call, and somewhere out there, something was listening. 6 months had passed since the night Marcus Chen changed the world. And in some ways everything was different, and in other ways nothing had changed at all. The news had spread slowly at first, leaking out through government channels and scientific networks before finally exploding across every television and computer screen on the planet. And for a few weeks, humanity had talked about nothing else. People gathered in the streets and stared up at the sky as if they expected to see something there. And religious leaders gave speeches about the meaning of life and the nature of God. And scientists argued on television about what the signal might mean and what humanity should do next. But then the weeks turned into months, and no response came from the stars, and the signal itself had stopped broadcasting on the same night Marcus had sent his reply. And slowly the world began to lose interest and return to its normal concerns. There were still wars and elections and celebrity scandals and sports championships. And these things seemed more real and more important to most people than a mysterious signal from a place so far away that the human mind could not truly understand the distance Marcus had become famous for a little while, his face appearing on magazine covers and news programs. And some people called him a hero who had taken a bold step forward for humanity, while others called him a fool who had endangered the entire planet with his reckless action. He had lost his job at the observatory, of course, because he had violated every protocol and broken every rule. But the government had hired him as a consultant, which really meant that they wanted to keep him close and ask him questions and make sure he did not talk to the wrong people. He lived in a small apartment in Washington now, and he spent his days in windowless conference rooms answering the same questions over and over again. And at night he lay awake and wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. Dr. Elena Vasquez was the one who finally told him the truth. She was the head of the International Response Team, a brilliant woman with gray hair and tired eyes who had spent her entire career searching for evidence of extraterrestrial life, and who now led the effort to understand what Marcus had done. She called him into her office on a Tuesday afternoon, and when Marcus saw her face, he knew immediately that something was very wrong. The office was cluttered with papers and computer screens and photographs of distant galaxies, and Dr. Vasquez sat behind her desk with her hands folded in front of her and looked at Marcus with an expression he could not read. She told him to sit down, and he sat. And she was quiet for a long moment before she began to speak. The signal had come from a star system 340 light-years away. She said, a yellow dwarf star not so different from the sun. And for decades astronomers had been watching that system because there were signs of something unusual there. Thermal signatures that suggested massive industrial activity. Structures orbiting the star that were too large and too regular to be natural. Evidence of a civilization that was harvesting energy from its sun on a scale that humanity could barely imagine. They had been building something called a Dyson swarm. She explained, a vast collection of satellites that would eventually surround their star and capture almost all of its energy. A project that would take thousands of years to complete, but that would give them power beyond anything humanity could dream of. They were what scientists called a Type 2 civilization, far more advanced than humanity, capable of engineering on a scale that made human achievements look like the scratchings of children in the sand. And now they were gone. Dr. Vasquez pulled up images on her computer screen. Before and after photographs taken by the most powerful telescopes on Earth and in orbit. The before images showed the star system alive with activity. Bright points of light moving in complex patterns. Heat signatures that indicated engines and factories and cities. The after images showed nothing but the cold light of the star itself, alone in the darkness, with no sign that anyone had ever lived there at all. Everything had stopped within hours of Marcus sending his reply. The heat signatures had vanished. The moving lights had gone dark, and the half-built Dyson swarm had begun to drift apart as if no one was there to maintain it anymore. Marcus stared at the images and felt something cold settle in his stomach. He asked her what had happened to them, and Dr. Vasquez shook her head slowly. She did not know, she said, and that was the most frightening part of all an entire civilization. Billions or perhaps trillions of beings had simply ceased to exist overnight. And humanity had no idea why. Maybe they had destroyed themselves, she said. Triggered some kind of self-destruct protocol to prevent their location from being discovered. Maybe something had destroyed them. Some predator species that hunted for signals and eliminated anyone who made noise. Maybe they had simply fled, abandoning their home and everything they had built to escape from whatever danger Marcus had brought to their doorstep. Marcus asked her if she was saying that he had killed them, and his voice cracked as he spoke the words. Dr. Vasquez looked at him for a long moment, and there was something in her eyes that might have been pity. She said she was not blaming him, because they did not have enough information to blame anyone. But she needed him to understand the scale of what might have happened if his signal had caused this. If his simple greeting of prime numbers and binary code had somehow led to the extinction of an entire species. Then humanity needed to know why so that it could protect itself from the same fate. Marcus sat in silence as the weight of her words pressed down on him. He had wanted to believe that answering the signal was the right thing to do. That reaching out across the vast emptiness of space was what humanity was meant to do. That his moment of impulsive hope would lead to something beautiful. Instead, it might have led to the death of everyone he had tried to contact. He thought about all those beings Those aliens who had been building their swarm around their star, who had been sending their signal out into the void, hoping that someone would hear them. And he wondered if they had felt hope when they received his message, or if they had felt terror. He would never know. They were gone now, silent and cold and dead. And their great project would drift apart over the centuries until there was nothing left to show that they had ever existed at all. Dar Vasquez told Marcus that he was not to speak of this to anyone, that the information was classified at the highest level, that the governments of the world were not ready to tell their people that humanity might have just witnessed the extinction of intelligent life. Marcus nodded and stood up to leave. And he paused at the door and asked her one more question. He asked her what they were going to do. She looked at him with those tired eyes and said they were going to watch and wait and hope that whatever had killed the aliens did not come for us. Next, Marcus walked out of the building and into the bright sunlight of the afternoon, and he stood on the sidewalk and looked up at the clear blue sky and wondered what was hiding up there in the darkness between the stars. He had answered a call that was not meant for him, and now silence was spreading across the universe like a disease. 8 months after the first civilization went silent, the second signal arrived. It came from the opposite direction of the first, from a star system on the other side of the sky. And this time, there was no doubt about who it was meant for. The beam was aimed directly at Earth. Marcus was sitting in his apartment watching television when his phone rang, and the voice on the other end told him to come immediately. And 20 minutes later, he was in a helicopter flying toward a secure facility somewhere in the Virginia countryside. Dr. Vasquez met him at the door, and she looked even more tired than the last time he had seen her, with dark circles under her eyes and a tremor in her hands that she tried to hide. She led him through a maze of corridors to a room filled with computers and screens and people talking urgently into phones. And she sat him down in front of a monitor and told him to watch the signal played across the screen, a complex pattern of pulses and frequencies that looked nothing like the first message Marcus had intercepted all those months ago. This was different, more intricate, more deliberate. And even without understanding the language, Marcus could sense the emotion behind it: fear. The cryptographers had been working on it for 3 weeks. Dia Vasquez told him. Every codebreaker and linguist and mathematician on the planet collaborating to unlock the meaning hidden in those alien pulses. They had finally succeeded that morning. She pressed a button, and text began to scroll across the screen. The alien message translated into English. And Marcus read the words and felt his blood turn to ice. You answered the quiet ones. The message said, and you should not have done this. And we are sorry, so sorry, because you could not have known what you were doing. You should not exist now. The message continued, because nothing survives after speaking to the quiet ones. And we do not understand how you are still there. But you must listen to what we are telling you. The silence is coming for you. We have watched it for thousands of years, hunting and killing and erasing everything that makes noise, everything that sends signals into the void, everything that dares to announce its existence to the universe. The quiet ones knew this, and they hid themselves, and they spoke only in whispers aimed at safe places. But you heard them by accident, and you answered them with a shout, and now the silence knows where you are. It is already moving toward you, traveling through the darkness between stars. And when it arrives, it will do to you what it did to the quiet ones, and what it has done to thousands of civilizations before them. Do not respond to this message, the aliens warned, because every signal you send makes it easier for the silence to find you. Go dark and go silent, and bury your transmitters deep in the ground where no one can hear them. Hide yourselves and pray to whatever gods you believe in, because there is nothing else you can do. We are sorry. The message ended, and we wish we could help you, but we cannot. Because if we tried, the silence would find us too. Goodbye, young species. And may you find peace in whatever comes next. The message repeated once. And then the signal stopped, and the screen showed nothing but static. And the star system that had sent the warning went dark just like the first one had. Marcus sat in his chair and stared at the screen and could not speak. All around him the room erupted in chaos. Voices shouting and phones ringing and people running back and forth with papers in their hands. But Marcus heard none of it. He was thinking about what he had done. He had not just killed one civilization. He had doomed his own as well. And now something called the silence was coming to erase humanity from the universe, just as it had erased countless others before Dr. Vasquez was saying something to him. But he could not hear her words through the roaring in his ears. Someone was shaking his shoulder, and he looked up and saw a woman he did not recognize. An Asian woman with short black hair and sharp, intelligent eyes who was speaking to him in a calm, clear voice. Her name was Dr. Yuki Tanaka, and she was a xenolinguist who had spent her entire career studying theoretical alien languages and imagining how first contact might unfold. She told Marcus that everyone in the room was panicking, and that was understandable, but panic would not save them. And she needed him to listen to her because she had seen something in the data that no one else had noticed. Marcus looked at her and nodded slowly. And she pulled up a chair and sat down beside him. She told him that 2 advanced civilizations had now gone extinct or fled in terror because of something called the silence. And the 3rd civilization had sent a warning and then vanished as well. These were beings who could build structures around stars and send signals across hundreds of light years. Beings who were so far beyond humanity that they might as well have been gods. And yet a simple maintenance technician from Earth had done something that terrified them. Marcus had sent the most basic message imaginable. Just prime numbers and a binary greeting. The kind of thing a child could have created. And the result had been catastrophic. Dr. Tanaka leaned forward and looked into his eyes and asked him what that told him about humanity's position in this universe. Marcus did not understand what she was asking. She explained that for billions of years, the silence had been hunting and killing civilizations that made noise. And for billions of years, every civilization that encountered it had responded the same way. They hid and they cowered and they went quiet. And they hoped that the silence would not find them. No one had ever fought back. No one had ever refused to be silent. No one had ever stood up and shouted into the void and dared the darkness to come for them. Until now, Marcus understood what she was saying, and he wanted to believe it, but all he could see was the death and destruction that his message had caused. Dr. Tanaka shook her head and told him that he had not killed those civilizations. The silence had killed them, and the silence would have killed them eventually anyway, because that was what it did. But Marcus had given humanity something that no other species had ever had. He had given them a warning. He had given them time. 340 years, she said. That was how long it would take for the silence to reach Earth. Because that was how far away the first signal had come from. 340 years to prepare, to build, to grow stronger, to become something that could fight back against the darkness that was coming. She asked Marcus if he understood what humanity could accomplish. In 340 years, 340 years ago, humans had been fighting with swords and sailing wooden ships across the oceans. 340 years from now, they could be masters of the solar system, with weapons and defenses beyond anything the silence had ever faced. Marcus looked at her and saw the fire in her eyes, the absolute refusal to accept defeat, the stubborn human determination that had carried their species from caves to cities to the stars. And for the first time since this nightmare had begun, he felt something other than fear and guilt. He felt hope. The answer to the mystery came not from space, but from Earth itself. A team of researchers working in an underground laboratory in Switzerland had been studying the cosmic microwave background radiation, the ancient light that had been traveling through the universe since the beginning of time. And they found something hidden in the static that changed everything. The universe had been noisy once, 4 billion years ago, when Earth was still a ball of molten rock being bombarded by asteroids. The cosmos had been full of signals. Thousands of civilizations broadcasting their existence across the vast distances. Between stars, the researchers could see the echoes of those ancient transmissions buried in the background radiation. Faint traces of a time when the galaxy had been alive with voices and music and conversation. And then, approximately 4.2 billion years ago, everything had stopped. Every signal, every broadcast, every whisper had gone silent within a span of just a few hundred years. And the universe had been quiet ever since. Almost quiet. There were still signals here and there. The researchers discovered that they were hidden and careful and aimed at specific locations rather than broadcast openly. The desperate communications of survivors who had learned to hide the quiet ones, and the civilization that had sent the warning, and countless others scattered across the galaxy. All of them cowering in the darkness, all of them terrified of being heard. Something had swept through the universe 4 billion years ago and killed everything that made noise. And that something was still out there, still hunting, still enforcing the silence that had fallen over the cosmos. The governments of the world convened an emergency council, and Marcus was brought before them to testify, to explain himself, to answer for what he had done. The council met in a vast underground chamber beneath the mountains of Colorado, and the leaders of every major nation sat in a circle around Marcus as he stood at a podium and faced their questions. Some of them were angry, their faces red with fury as they demanded to know how a simple technician had dared to risk the entire human race with his reckless action. Some of them were afraid, their voices trembling as they asked what humanity could possibly do against a force that had been destroying civilizations since before the Earth existed. And some of them, a small but growing number, looked at Marcus with something that might have been respect. Dr. Tanaka was there as well, and she presented her findings to the council, explaining what the researchers had discovered about the ancient silence and what it meant for humanity's future. The silence was not a creature, she told them, and it was not a civilization. It was a machine, somewhere in the distant past. Billions of years before humanity existed, there had been a species that was afraid. Afraid of competition, afraid of other voices, afraid of anything that might challenge their dominance of the universe. They had built something to eliminate that threat. An automated system that traveled through space at nearly the speed of light, seeking out signals and destroying anything that produced them. And then that species had vanished, destroyed by their own creation or simply faded away over the eons. And their machine had continued its mission without them. For 4 billion years, the silence had been pruning the galaxy, cutting down any civilization that grew too loud, enforcing a quiet that had never been natural. Every species that encountered it had responded the same way, by hiding, by going silent, by accepting the rule of the machine and hoping to be overlooked. Dr. Tanaka stood before the council and asked them if humanity was going to do the same thing. Was humanity going to crawl into a hole and hide for the rest of its existence, living in fear of a machine built by a species that had been dead for longer than the Earth had existed? Or was humanity going to do something that no one had ever done before? Was humanity going to fight back? The chamber erupted in argument, voices shouting over each other, some calling for immediate signal cessation, and others demanding more information, and others insisting that the whole thing was a hoax or a mistake. But through it all, Marcus watched the faces of the people in the room, and he saw something changing. Fear was still there, yes, but something else was growing alongside it. something that burned hotter and brighter than the fear anger. These were the leaders of the human race, the descendants of people who had survived ice ages and plagues and wars and every disaster that the universe had thrown at them. And they did not like being told that they had to hide. They did not like being told that they had to be silent. They did not like being told that a machine was coming to kill them and there was nothing they could do about it. 3 months later, the long-range telescopes detected something moving through space toward the solar system. It was exactly where Dr. Tanaka had predicted it would be, traveling along the path that Marcus's signal had taken, following the trail back to its source. The silence was coming. It would arrive in 337 years. Humanity began to prepare. The nations of the world put aside their differences and united behind a single goal: the survival of the species against a threat that cared nothing for borders or politics or ideology. Factories that had built weapons for war began building ships for space, and laboratories that had researched medicine and technology turned their attention to defense systems and propulsion methods and everything else that humanity would need to survive. What was coming? Marcus watched. It all happened from his apartment in Washington, where he now spent his days working with Dr. Tanaka and a team of scientists and engineers who were planning for a war that their grandchildren's grandchildren would have to fight. He had become something he never expected to be, a symbol, a rallying cry. The man who had answered the call and brought the enemy to humanity's doorstep. Some people still hated him for it, blamed him for the destruction that was coming, cursed his name, and called him the worst traitor in human history. But more and more people were starting to see him differently. They called him the first speaker, the one who had refused to be silent, the one who had shown humanity that there was something to fight against. And when Marcus walked through the streets now, people did not look at him with anger or fear. They looked at him with determination. Because humanity was not going to hide, humanity was going to answer. 340 years was not a long time for a species, but it was a long time for humans. Marcus Chun died at the age of 94, surrounded by his children and grandchildren in a hospital room overlooking the Pacific Ocean. And his last words were a question. He asked if humanity was ready. His daughter held his hand and told him yes, they were ready. And Marcus smiled and closed his eyes and left the world that he had changed forever. But his story did not end with his death. In the centuries that followed, Marcus became something more than a man, something more than a memory. He became a symbol. Schools were named after him, and statues were built in his honor, and his face appeared on currency and stamps and the sides of spacecraft. And every child on Earth learned the story of the maintenance technician who had answered the call. His unauthorized signal became a rallying cry for humanity's greatest project, the transformation of a single frightened species into something that could stand against the darkness. They spread to the moon first, and then to Mars, and then to the moons of Jupiter and Saturn and the asteroids that drifted through the void between planets. They built cities in space and farms on distant worlds and factories that floated in the clouds of gas giants. And they did it all with a speed and determination that would have seemed impossible to the humans of Marcus's time, because they had a deadline. Every child born in those centuries grew up knowing that something was coming, something that had killed thousands of civilizations, something that was moving through the darkness toward them at nearly the speed of light. And instead of hiding, instead of cowering, instead of accepting their fate, they prepared. They built weapons that could crack planets and shields that could withstand the heat of stars. And they invented new technologies that the scientists of Marcus's era could never have imagined. They found the hidden survivors, the quiet ones and the whisperers and the buried, the civilizations that had been hiding in the darkness for millions of years. And they offered them something unprecedented: an alliance, a voice, a chance to stop hiding and start fighting. Most of them refused at first. too frightened by billions of years of fear to believe that anything could stand against the silence. But humanity was persistent, and humanity was stubborn. And humanity kept reaching out and kept offering and kept refusing to take no for an answer. And slowly, one by one, the hidden civilizations began to emerge from their holes and join the alliance that humanity was building. When the silence finally arrived at the edge of the solar system, it found something that it had never encountered before in 4 billion years of hunting. It found a fleet. 17 species stood together in the darkness. Their ships arranged in formations that stretched across millions of kilometers. Their weapons charged, and their shields raised, and their voices united in a single message. We are not afraid of you. We will not be silent. Come and face us if you dare. The battle lasted 11 days. It was the largest and most terrible conflict in the history of the galaxy. A war fought across the solar system, with weapons that could destroy moons and defenses that could block the fury of the sun itself. Humanity lost Mars in the fighting. The red planet cracked open by a weapon that turned its core to fire. And 3 colony worlds on the outer edges of the solar system were burned to ash. 18 billion people died, humans and allies alike. Their names inscribed on memorials that would stand for 1,000 years. But they won. The silence was not a god, and it was not invincible. It was just a machine. Old and powerful, but ultimately limited by the parameters of its ancient programming. It had been designed to hunt civilizations that hid and ran and cowered in fear. Not civilizations that stood their ground and fought back with everything they had. And when the last of its components was destroyed, when the final piece of the machine that had terrorized the galaxy for 4 billion years was reduced to dust and debris, a silence of a different kind fell over the solar system, a silence of victory, a silence of peace. Marcus Chun's great-granddaughter stood on the bridge of the flagship, first response, and looked out at the stars that were no longer enemies. And she thought about the man whose choice had led to this moment. He had been a maintenance technician, nothing more and nothing less. A man who fixed broken cables and replaced failing hard drives and made sure the coffee machine in the break room worked properly, and he had saved the universe. She activated the ship's transmitter and broadcast a message in all directions, at all frequencies. With no attempt at concealment, the silence is broken, she said, and you can speak now. And we will be listening. For a long moment there was nothing but the background hiss of the cosmos, and then, one by one, signals began to appear from distant stars and hidden worlds and places that had been quiet for millions of years. Transmitters powered on, and voices emerged, hesitant at first, and then stronger and clearer as the beings behind them realized that they were truly safe. They sang and spoke and laughed and cried. And the universe that had been silent for so long remembered how to make noise. Thousands of civilizations coming out of hiding, reaching out to each other and to the species that had freed them. The galaxy was alive with voices for the first time in 4 billion years, and it had all started because one man, alone in the desert with the stars burning overhead, had decided that someone should answer. Marcus Chun had sent a message into the void, and the void had answered back, not with death and not with silence, but with voices, millions of voices, raised together in a chorus that would echo through the cosmos forever. The universe was singing again, and humanity had taught it the words.